Good morning. Thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Ahmed Bora, and I'm the CEO for the University Foundation and the Vice President for University Advancement here at Chico State. And I'm the host for today. We know that these are uncertain times as we navigate this rapidly changing environment. I hope you and your family are feeling well and staying safe wherever you are located. We have over 175 participants from all over the state of California and across all the decades of graduation and across the country. So thank you for being here with us this morning. Your Alumni Engagement Office and the Alumni Association have worked diligently to put together this webinar to support our alumni and friends by providing this educational opportunity. I would be remiss if I did not start today by acknowledging the significant challenges facing many small businesses, families, and friends for the last 4 weeks, the speed of which our normal life has dramatically shifted and forced decisions that no business owner and nonprofit leaders wants to face, mainly closures and layoffs, which have been disorienting. As you know, in response to the COVID-19, on March 27, the federal government passed the CARES Act. The cornerstone of the CARES Act for small businesses is the Paycheck Protection Program, or what we call the PPP. And that's the focus of our webinar today. Before I introduce our speaker today, I have a few housekeeping items to share. When you want to submit your questions, you can look in the panel on the right-hand side. You can type your questions under the questions section and submit it, and we will try to respond to as many questions as we can in the next hour. Also, you will see under support documents in the handout section, we have a few documents placed to you, those for you to keep. And we will follow up after the webinar. The Alumni Engagement Office will send an email with all the documentation and all the support material, including these presentations. So you could have it for any for your sake. And now I'm delighted to introduce to you our speakers for today. The moderators for this session will be the Dean for the College of Business, Dr. Terence L. Dr. Lau joined Chico State family to lead the College of Business in January 2019. Under his leadership, the college will be launching an online MBA program this upcoming fall, so stay tuned, watch your email, and look for us on social media. He also started a feasibility study for a new cutting-edge facility that will provide a 21st century education for the future Wildcats. And our speaker for today is Glenn Thomas, a member of the Chico State family and a class of 1983. Glenn is a founder and a partner of TYS LLP. Glenn is a veteran in the industry with over 35 years experience. He has passion and love for higher education and public service. He's an active volunteer and serves on many boards and committees. He is a member of the Cal CPA Society Accounting Education Committee, member of the College of Business Advisory Board, member of the Accounting Program Advisory Board, and member of the Audit Committee on the University Foundation. Gentlemen, I'm delighted to have you both here. And now I would like to turn the screen to Dr. Lau.
Thank you, Ahmed. And good morning, everyone, from my home in Chico to your home, wherever you may be. When the current emergency hit 3 weeks ago, we realized that we were dealing with two crises, a global pandemic with an economic recession strapped to it. Unlike in past recessions, state and federal governments have moved quickly to address the economy. The centerpiece of this response is the CARES Act. Today, we'll be discussing who is covered by the CARES Act, what the PPP program does, the loan terms and how loans may be forgiven, and how small businesses can apply for a PPP loan and what documentation they need to apply. We'll wrap up by looking at the current status of the PPP program. Many of you submitted questions about the PPP program during your registration for this webinar. We will be answering many of those questions as we go along. If additional questions come up during this webinar, please feel free to send them along through the Q&A chat box, and we'll answer them towards the end of our program. Finally, it goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway, since I'm a lawyer, nothing in this webinar should be construed as legal or tax advice, and we urge you to seek counsel from your accountant or attorney for specific questions that apply to your specific questions. With that, it's my pleasure to welcome Glenn Thomas, our featured speaker, to the program. Glenn, good morning.
Good morning, everybody, and thanks to Ahmed and Terence. Um, every day I get to spend connected to the Chico State community is a great day for me. I have a few brief comments before we get started. First of all, I want to apologize in advance if my voice gets tired, as it is a consequence of my journey with throat cancer some 10 years ago. I also want to assure you that I'm feeling strong and healthy. The situation we are in with the Paycheck Protection Program, with the CARES Act, is developing rapidly. There are many unknowns, so today will provide me with the opportunity to exercise what I refer to as my I don't know muscle. During my 38-year career, I've had the opportunity to experience several professional and personal crises. I've learned that crises contains uncertainty. Uncertainty tends to lead to stress and stress and anxiety will increase the likelihood of making poor decisions. TYS strives to be our client's trusted advisor. As such, we aim to provide a broad perspective. This includes using both hindsight and foresight. Hindsight to remind clients of what their challenges were a short period ago, mainly talent, acquisition and retention, and foresight to look around the next bend in the road during highly uncertain times. So with that, let's get started, Terence.
Okay, thank you, Glenn, and welcome to the program. Glenn, I wanted to ask you initially to just talk about the legislation that got us here to where we are now. Where does the CARES Act come from? And are there other programs that are meant to work alongside the CARES Act?
Yeah, so to date, and there are certainly things that are going on today in the House and Senate with the Treasury Secretary. But to date, we've passed three bills, three pieces of legislation. Included in that legislation are a variety of things. The primary item, though, in terms of funding, was the CARES Act that was passed 2 weeks ago tomorrow, March 27th, the $2.2 million bill. This includes a lot of different elements in it, support and emergency aid for big business, support for unemployment benefits, support for individual payments to individuals, and significant support for small business in the form of the PPP, or as Ahmed said earlier, the Paycheck Protection Program and their loans. There are a series of loans that are available through this, including the EIDL, the EIG, and the PPP. First two of which are the Emergency Injury Disaster Loan. Frankly, we're not seeing a lot of this right now because these are truly loans that require collateral, guarantees, and repayment. And the EEIG, or the Emergency Economic Injury Grant, is a $10,000 grant that couples with the EIDL. And then, of course, the item that we're here to talk about, the Paycheck Protection Program, or PPP. There have been other aspects of the legislation, as I said, and with the jobs report that came out this morning that had jobless claims of 6.6 million additional, leading to total jobless claims of nearly 17 million in the last 3 weeks. That approximate somewhere between 15 and 17% of the jobs in the country. So that's kind of a brief summary of what's happened.
Thank you, Glenn. We had a chance to look at some questions that were submitted when folks registered for this webinar. And one of the questions that came in was, is this the free SBA money that we've been hearing about in the media? How would you characterize this, Glenn? And is free SBA money a fair characterization?
So the EEIG is clearly a grant that's limited to $10,000, and we are seeing people apply for that. The difference with that one is it's applied through the SBA, and last year the SBA processed 58,000 total loans for the full year of 2019. As you can imagine, in this, the SBA is being asked to stand up a program that's going to have a multitude, perhaps as many as 10 to 100 times as many as that loans within a month's time. So is it the grant? The EEIG is a grant, and the PPP has provisions in it that do provide for forgiveness.
Thank you. We'll talk about that later on when we talk about the forgiveness part of the loan. But let's move on to our first topic, which is eligibility for the PPP. And at the outset, I guess it's worth noting, Glenn, that this is a $2 trillion rescue plan. And clearly, the government is trying to keep as much of the economy going as possible. There's other parts of this plan earmarked for the airlines. There's parts earmarked for specific industries, for manufacturers like Boeing. But this specific portion of the stimulus package is earmarked for small businesses, which is why it's going through the Small Business Administration. So let's talk specifically about small businesses and specifically the PPP. Who is eligible for a PPP loan? Glenn?
So first of all, there's $349 billion that have been set aside in of the $2.2 trillion in the CARES Act. The SBA, Small Business Administration, as the funder of this program. These loans are being administered by private banks, and the people who are eligible are small businesses as defined by the SBA. And small businesses defined by the SBA are generally employers that employ less than 500 individuals. And I say they're generally. One of the things you'll learn, or you would learn if you dive into the SBA regulation, is there's exceptions to exceptions. So there's a lot of detail in this, and care should be given to make sure that even though you may have more than 500 employees, you may still qualify as one of those businesses, either as defined in the CARES Act, such as a restaurant, or specifically in the SBA regulation that allows you with more than 500 employees to be treated as a small business. So provide some larger context. There's approximately over 30 million small businesses in the most recent SBA publication. Suggests that there's over 30 million small businesses, of which nearly 6 million of them have employees. And of those that have employees, they employ a workforce of over 60 million. 60 million of the nearly 127 million total workforce in the US. So it's a significant component, nearly half of the US economy. So let's talk a little bit about what a few of the other components under who is eligible. So virtually all small business, it doesn't matter whether you're a C Corp, S Corp, partnership, LLC, sole proprietorships, even. It does within the guidance contain certain not-for-profits, 501c3s or charities, 501c19s, veterans organizations, certain tribal organizations. it does seem to be implying that other not-for-profits will not be included. Things like trade organizations or even golf courses. Next item is documentation of in business as of February 15th, 2020. I say documentation required. Frankly, this is probably going to be easy for you to document if you're borrowing through an existing relationship with a lender, because they will just have regular business practice to document that you were in business. This is probably going to be more of a challenge as it relates to creating a new relationship if your lender is not participating in the program, which we'll talk about a little bit more about later. Another issue I wanted to point out was affiliation. Affiliation, frankly, is a 25-cent word for grouping. And if you have an individual that controls either through ownership or control more than one entity, it may require you to affiliate or to group those entities in terms of looking at the 500 employee rule. So great care needs to be taken a look at that. And with everything, there are certain excluded businesses. Illegal activities. So if you're a cannabis business, which while legal in the state of California and other many forward-thinking states, is legal, it's not legal for federal purposes. So this likely suggests that if you're a cannabis business, you have employees, you won't be allowed to participate. Household employers are excluded business, and owners incarcerated, or even as what I say are in the system. They've been indicted or some other level of being in the judicial system. And lastly, if you defaulted or are delinquent on an SBA loan, your organization within the last 7 years, you're also not going to be able to participate.
Thank you, Glenn. A few questions came in from our viewers. The first question is, I don't have employees. In other words, the business is owner operated and managed, assuming the owner here does not draw a regular salary. Do they still qualify for a PPP loan?
They do indeed. Clearly, with a couple caveats, you've got to go through the process of making a calculation of what you may be eligible for. And we'll talk about that again a little bit later. But clearly, unincorporated businesses, sole proprietorships, do qualify for PPP. But let's be clear, this is and will favor this act, and the PPP will favor those businesses that do have employees.
Right, and there is a decision that businesses have to make here, because if you lay off people, they can qualify for unemployment, but the PPP is meant to keep people employed. So if you go down the PPP route, you are obligated to keep people employed rather than laying them off.
You've been doing your homework.
Yeah, so a decision has to be made.
Yes. So the simple answer is yes. The various emergency aid, if you will, and truly, let's be clear, that's what this is. This emergency aid must be balanced, and you've got to look at all possible avenues of recovery to see what would be the most beneficial for you. Whether it's if you're a sole proprietorship, you may decide to go on unemployment because the benefit that you could get on through unemployment would be better than the benefit that you could get through the PPP. Because in the past, and this is not my area of expertise, but unemployment benefits were not available for those that were self-employed. But under these three laws that have been passed, these pieces of legislation, you clearly would be.
And it's worth mentioning that the CARES Act and other legislation also provides for an additional $600 a week in federal unemployment on top of any state unemployment benefits. So that can be, as you say, a route that most small businesses need to carefully examine as well. Glenn, a couple more questions with respect to eligibility, and these surround independent contractors. One viewer asked, do independent contractors count as employees? And what about if the business itself is an independent contractor? We have a viewer who was a rideshare operator until business dried up on March 15th. So what if the owner is the independent contractor, and what if the business has independent contractors working for the business?
Well, so this is not to make this any more complicated, but this is a little bit more nuanced, at least, because of Senate Bill 5 that was passed toward the end of 2019 with regard to classification of employees from 1099 to W-2. And clearly that's the case in California. But the 1099s, and I'm speaking primarily now to my California audience, 1099s would typically not be included in the base for the employer. So if you're 1099ing somebody, issuing them a 1099, you would not typically count them in your wages. Okay, so that then the person who is claiming the 1099 or who is receiving the 1099 would be eligible themselves.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. And final question from a viewer, what about new businesses? We have a viewer who started in February, right before the COVID crisis hit. They've yet to sign up any employees. How will this affect brand new businesses and employees who are on hold while the crisis passes?
So we'll get into this a little bit again later in terms of calculating how much you can borrow. But there's two hurdles to that. First is the business need to have been in place on February 15th. So we said February. So I'm going to assume for the sake of this discussion that they formed at least February 14th, maybe February 15th. But the other challenge is that the amount you can borrow is based upon the trailing 12-month period. So unfortunately, that my initial take on that is that they wouldn't be able to borrow within the PPP program. But however, you may be able to, as I talked about earlier, the EIDL, the disaster loan. That may be an avenue for you. And while some of the provisions aren't as attractive as they would be under PPP, they still would provide a source of monies that could bridge the gap.
Thank you, Glenn. Speaking of how much we can borrow, let's move on to that portion in terms of exactly how much is available to companies and what are the terms of the loan, since this is a loan that we're talking about here. So how much can I borrow?
So I'm gonna thank you, Ahmed. So as we talked about earlier, $349 billion in loans available. Each individual can borrow up to a maximum of $10 million. Okay, most of the 100 or so that we have helped of our clients to apply for this have actually landed in that somewhere between 100,000 and $1 million, but we do have a few that have reached the $10 million stage. So you can borrow up to 10 million, and it's on a first come first served basis. Okay, so that's an important factor to consider, that timing and getting this in as soon as possible is important. So you'll see the terms that I've listed there, and I won't systematically reread those for you, but just simply point out that there are attractive terms on these loans, even if they remain loans. They are absolutely loans when they're issued, and they have forgiveness provisions. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how we're going to calculate how much they can borrow. Okay, so this is a loan based upon payroll and certain related payroll costs incurred over the last 12 months. So the period that we can look at, first of all, we can either, depending on what's the easiest number or frankly the most beneficial number for you to look at, you can either look at this as 2019 and use 2019 data, or you can use a fiscal year approach. Okay, the template that I'm going to share with you later, or that we're making available to all of the participants today, does it on a fiscal year basis. Okay, so you take payroll costs, which include all compensation, W-2 compensation, importantly capped at $100,000 per individual. Okay, it also includes group benefits, medical, dental, other group benefits, includes union benefits. Okay, many of our clients, we spend time in the construction space, and many of our clients are union contractors that pay significant union benefits. Those benefits are included as well. And these benefits are on top of the $100,000. That was not clear when the original guidance came out, but when the FAQ came out in the last several days, that was made clear. And
so Glenn, if I could interrupt you, the loan is limited to $100,000 per employee, but that's only a base salary. So on top of that, you might have benefits, healthcare, retirement, and those can all go on top of the $100,000 per employee.
Correct. So what you do is you determine that number, your total number for the last 12 months, and then you divide that by 12 to get your average monthly cost, and you multiply that times 2.5. That becomes your eligible loan amount.
And 2.5 is the amount of time the government expects that this is supposed to cover.
This phase, correct.
Yeah.
What I would also share with you is that you can, under the current provisions, you can only apply for one loan. So you have one shot at this. So what I would say with that is, in terms of managing your relationship with lenders, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, is you need to make sure you're in communication with them and that you have a lender that will support you in the borrowing you want to make.
Glenn, even though it's a loan, do borrowers need to put up any kind of collateral? Is there a credit check, individual or company-wise? Does this go on your credit report when you apply for this loan?
Whether it goes on your credit report is undetermined at this stage, but there is no credit check. There's no collateral required, and there's no guarantee by the borrowers.
A few questions came in from our viewers. How fast do I have to repay the loan if I am able to get one? So
there is a automatic 6-month deferral of interest and principal from the date of the loan origination, and perhaps longer depending on where we go.
And another question, do I have to prove that I cannot get credit elsewhere?
You do not. And,
so,
and let's make clear, there is no, while there is a need, a requirement to demonstrate need in the EIDL, the disaster loans, there is no demonstration of need required in the PPP. There are certifications that are required as a part of the application that require you to certify that you will be impacted by COVID-19.
Are there limitations on what the loan funds can be used for?
Absolutely. This is one of the things that we're dealing with now with some of our clients that are getting approved is, okay, now that I've been approved for the loan, what do I do? And we're recommending that they create as clear an audit trail as possible to demonstrate that the loans are used to cover qualified costs. And qualified costs include things like, as we talked about, the items that are included in the loan determination, but it's a broader category of costs than that include rents, mortgage, interest, not principal, but mortgage interest, and utilities.
Let's move on to our next area, which is to talk about loan forgiveness. Can you talk us through, Glenn, this idea that even though this is a loan, that eventually it might be forgiven by, would it be forgiven by the bank or by the SBA? And does that matter? And why is it important? Why is it important that this loan might be forgiven?
Well, if the loan's forgiven, let's talk broadly. If the loan's forgiven, it converts from a loan to a grant. And a grant, when we first started hearing of this about 2 weeks, and I first started having conversations with clients about this, I actually have one of my clients who I'd never heard swore before this, and I heard him swear at me, or not at me, with me at the time. So anyway, so it's a grant, and the best part of this grant is it's a tax-free grant. Okay, we're certain that it's tax-free on a federal purpose. We're unclear yet as to whether the states will tax it or not.
So that sounds like a pretty good deal. How do I get my loan forgiven?
Yeah. So first of all, the loans can be forgiven up to 100% of principal plus interest. So while interest is not a big factor, 1%, it's not a big deal. It's possible to have everything forgiven. And as we talked about, it's what you do is you measure your costs for an 8-week period in these qualified costs, as we talked about, the items, the payroll and related costs that are in the process of determining the loan amount, as well as mortgage interest, rent, utilities that we had mentioned. So for that 8-week period, you mentioned it, there are certain requirements. There's a requirement that no more than 25% of the cost can be spent on these non-payroll related costs. And there's a requirement with regard to retention as calculated by full-time equivalents of your workforce, retention of your workforce. To make no mistake about it, for these to be optimized, a business should really look at these as these are funding you to keep your workforce in place.
So one of the questions we had relates to that question, to that specific matter. A viewer asked, what if I've already laid off employees or cut pay? I guess the question is, if I get this loan, can I bring those employees back, or must I bring those employees back?
My guess is that my expectation is that they're probably still unemployed, so you could bring them back. Yes, it would probably benefit you to bring them back within that 8-week period. That being the case, there are provisions that if you bring employees back as of June 30th, it won't harm you from an FTE calculation perspective. It may harm you from an expense perspective. Frankly, great planning. This is the area that probably will require the most planning and work with others make sure that you optimize the benefits of this as much as possible. Another document that we're sharing with everybody, another tool that we're sharing with everybody is a loan forgiveness worksheet that we have in beta form that will help look at that to determine how to maximize the forgiveness. But maximizing the forgiveness will take great care.
And thank you for that. And let me just remind our viewers that the handouts Glenn is talking about are available in your GoToWebinar panel under handouts. They're all downloadable there, as well as our chat box, where if you've got questions for Glenn, he's more than willing to answer them towards the end of our program. Just type them into the chat, and we're collecting those questions. Let's move on, Glenn, and talk a little bit about the mechanics of getting this loan. Let's assume I'm a small business owner and I have made a decision that I would like to keep paying my employees, and I'd like to keep them busy and employed as much as I can, and I would like to apply for a PPP loan. Who do I borrow from?
Thank you. So originally they were rolling this out, and it was intended, they had limited to the SBA participants in the SBA 7A program. And they realized that the 800 or so institutions countrywide wouldn't be able to handle the load. And there'd be other regulatory challenges like the KYC regulations, know your customer regulations, and the like. So they subsequently broadened this to pretty much anybody who can lend money: banks, credit unions, farm credit institutions, or even if you have a rich uncle, your rich Uncle Joe. So that's a bit of humor. I don't have a rich Uncle Joe, but I got two Uncle Bobs. But my two Uncle Bobs don't equal a rich Uncle Joe.
So it has to be a bank, credit union, or other institution that is normally in the business of lending money.
Exactly, and there are other institutions that candidly were institutions that typically lended in non-traditional manners, like factoring and the like. You know, institutions like Cabbage or the like that are now in the business. I mentioned earlier that the SBA made 58,000 loans last year, are going to make incredibly higher magnitude of that within this short period of time. They realized that they weren't going to be able to do this themselves. So they needed institutions to be able to do this. So that's why they rolled this out to as many people as possible.
Okay, so banks are supposedly accepting these loan applications. Let's talk about whether that's actually happening. What's the current status, Glenn? Are people getting funding, and who's getting funded?
So let me. Can I say one more thing before we leave the
Sure.
borrowing from thing?
Of course.
One of the things I'd suggest is in this area is relationships are always important. Okay, always important. I don't think they ever become more important than in times of crisis. And so, frankly, those clients who've had good, solid relationships with their banks are those that have had the easiest time with this. So when you get involved with this and when you do this, it's important to nurture that relationship and to manage that relationship. I'd also suggest that one other thing to consider is to have backup plans, just in case you aren't getting what you need to get from your lender, that you have another alternative source to go to.
Okay, good. So let's talk about banks and who is getting funded, who is funding. I got to tell you, one of the questions that we got from our viewers is, will Wells Fargo get their act together?
Well, I have a dear friend who spent his career at Wells Fargo, and I trust me, I've enjoyed chastising him at times for Wells Fargo's behavior over the last several years. But frankly, I think Wells has really stood up here and is doing the right thing. Initially, for those of you who haven't heard, Wells was, due to their prior shenanigans, was limited to lending $10 billion in this space. They ran out of that space within the first few hours of opening it to their clients. They appealed to the feds and to the SBA to waive those in this specific situation. Initially, they said no. And let's make no mistake about it. These are not money-making propositions for the banks. These are going to be at best break-even propositions. So Wells, in a weird way, while they may have been damaged in their relationships with their customers, they would have, at least short-term, made out by not having to lend more than $10 billion. So that all being said, within the last 24 hours, I believe 36 hours, the Fed has waived these restrictions with Wells, and so Wells is back in the game. So, and from my understanding, Wells is, if not the largest small business lender in the country, they're one of these largest.
Thanks, Glenn. Earlier, you talked about how you have some clients now who have been approved. Have they actually seen the money hit their accounts yet?
No. They're what to date, and I checked on this as recently as about 9 o'clock this morning. We don't have anybody yet who's received monies. We do have clients that have been approved and are being notified by their specific lenders, and they are being told that they should expect to receive the money next week. One was actually told that they were going to receive it on Friday. I'm hopeful of that. I'm more realistic that it's, I think, going to be sometime the following week. I want to, if I can I take a moment to read this a little bit? I started having conversations with clients about this, I think 2 weeks ago yesterday. And one of the reasons my voice is gone is that I've been talking pretty much nonstop with clients since then about this. And one of the things we try to do in this whole perspective thing is to define success, particularly in moments of crisis. How are we going to define that? And so, first of all, I had some clients say, I don't believe it. I'm not going to get free money. Okay, so the success to them would have been to get money. Others said, well, we won't get this for 60 to 90 days. And I tried to create the expectation based upon my conversations with clients was that, really, I think if we can say that this would be up and running within a week to 10 days, that the lenders would then have it and they'd be rolling out their applications and processing their applications and underwriting their applications within another week, and that we'd have money by the end of April. I tried to create that expectation, and frankly, I think we're going to succeed on that. I think we're going to actually start. A majority of the clients are going to get money by somewhere around the middle of the month, 15th to the 20th.
Thank you, Glenn. Why don't you take us through the 4 documents you've made available to our viewers and talk a little bit about each of them. And also, as you're addressing that, talk a little bit about how we define payroll and how you document payroll, and what does utilities include. Those are some of the questions that our viewers had in determining how much they can borrow.
Yeah. So let me payroll. If we're looking at it on a calendar basis, you can simply use your W-2 amounts that you have, and you can use your payroll reports. There are payroll services if you happen to be one that uses the payroll services like ADP, Paychecks, the like. They are being specifically called out as applicable reports that would qualify. With regard to utilities, this is something we looked at pretty early on because we said, well, how about our Wi-Fi? And for instance, somebody like us, we spend a lot for internet access, and how do we get in the cloud? Could we define that as utility? Unfortunately, it appears to us as though utilities are traditional utilities in the sense of, keeping the lights on and picking up the garbage, that kind of stuff. So let me talk a little bit about the supporting documentation I've provided. I'm going to talk a little bit about the public documents, and I'll talk a little bit about ours. But the public documents are the RIN 3245 blah blah blah, and it's essentially the interim final rule. It's a 31-page document that the SBA came out with on or about, I believe this came out just about a week ago yesterday. This came out, and it's a great document that will answer many of your questions. Subsequent to that, the SBA came out with their, as they always do, came out with their clarification of this document, a 6-page document, which was an FAQ addressing questions coming out of this. So those two are SBA documents that I think are highly useful. The other two documents are internally documents that our team stood up. And first of all, I want to tell you how proud I am of the way our team has addressed this and approached this, and in the middle of our busy season, because we're in the tradition. I mean, today is April 9th. Frankly, it's the craziest April 9th I've spent in the last 38 years. Okay, normally we'd be working at getting tax returns out and the like, but our team, we created a separate team that took on the creation of the understanding the loans, the PPP loans, understanding the forgiveness aspects, and stood these documents up. And we're really, really proud of this stuff. So, including one of the lead people on that is a fellow Chico State Wildcat. So, very proud of them. So, loan template, please. This is we're making this we're sharing our intellectual capital with the world. Okay, if it can be of use to you, please use it. Okay. And then there's the second one, which is the forgiveness template. It is in beta currently. As I said earlier, we've had over 100 people test out our loan template, and we think it's spot on. The forgiveness template is in beta version. So if you are one that uses it, please give us feedback. It's how we will make it better. Okay. Thank you.
Glenn, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Can you believe that 48 minutes have passed since this webinar started? We only have 12 minutes left on our clock. And I want to thank you for making those templates available to all our viewers. It's extremely generous. I've taken a look at that Excel spreadsheet for the loan template, and it's super easy to use. Anyone with just a little bit of knowledge of Excel will be able to navigate through it very quickly and very easily. And it calculates pretty much to the dollar and cent how much you can borrow from this program. So thank you for making that available. I understand that that's not where your generosity ends, and that you are willing to make an additional offer to our viewers. Can you tell us a bit more about that offer?
Yeah. Let me turn my camera back on because I wanted to change out from my Chico State gear to my Chico State family to my TYS family. So the last thing I want to leave you with is an offer. I was diagnosed with stage 4 throat cancer in 2008. And two of the many gifts I received in that journey were a glimpse into my own mortality and a deep understanding of the need to rely on one's community, a deep appreciation for vulnerability. We're all feeling an incredible sense of vulnerability, me included. Chico State is the hub of the wheel that all that is good in my life. You see my contact data on the screen? So please reach out to me if you think my advice would help you in any way. I will talk to you on a no-cost basis. It's a wildcat thing to do.
Glenn, that's incredibly generous. I know you're normally $950 an hour, so this is huge for our viewers.
Not quite that much.
But not free either.
Not free.
Ahmed, there's 9 minutes left, so how do you want to wrap this up? Do we have questions from the audience?
I think most of the question has been answered, and I want to make sure that we stay within our 1 hour time frame. We know people are busy and have a lot on their plates, but I would like to express on behalf of Chico State and Chico State community, I want to express my sincere gratitude to you, Glenn, for your kind and generous offer to our viewer. A lot of good questions, great answers, is one of the best that I have seen. And we appreciate everything you have done and continue to do to support your alma mater and be part of the Wildcat family and be in a support system for other alums as well. Before we close, I would like to share with the audience and our viewers that next week the Alumni Engagement Office will be launching our Wildcat Connect program that is empowered by first-hand application, is #1 application in the country in higher education. The goal and mission of the Alumni Engagement Office and the Alumni Association is to keep our alumni engaged and involved with each other as well as with the life of the institution. You can see the website in here. You're the first to see it because it will be launched next week. So please log in and sign up. When you do, it's going to offer you the following. #1, it will offer you an opportunity to be a life coach and a mentor, or will be a life coach or mentored by somebody else. Is allow us to bring alumni together and be a support system, very similar to what Glenn just mentioned. He's here to support our other Wildcats and be part of their success. But also it provides an opportunity for you to connect with some of our graduating seniors who's getting into the real world to experience life after Chico State. You could be part of that support system and support and success in their journey. The second piece of it, you'll have an opportunity for a lifelong learning, whether you graduate 2 years ago or 50 years ago, whether you're a CEO or seeking a new employment. We have custom design webinars to your taste and to your interest, and something that will pique your curiosity. You need to be signed in to Firsthand in order to do that. But I also, today was the first webinar, is the launching of the first webinar of our webinar series that we will be launching from now on. So you'll have an opportunity every few weeks to participate in a webinar that will be organizing about a subject matter to continue to provide service to our alums. And if you have any questions, you can contact Tammy Adams, and the email's in here. And I want to confirm again, we will have a follow-up email after we close this webinar with all the documentations, all the support materials, as well as this presentation with the Glenn's contact information if you need to outreach to him. We're here for all of you, and we would love to keep you involved in the life of in the life of Chico State. And I would like to thank Dr. Lau as well as Glenn for taking the time and for their willingness to share their knowledge and expertise with our viewers and our alums. And I just want to wish you the best, and thank you for participating today.
Thank you.
Thank you.